Everything you're about to hear is for education and entertainment purposes only. Whilst we are licensed, we're not aware of your personal financial circumstances. Any advice is general advice. Equity Mates operates under Australian Financial Services Licence 540697.
Equity Mates!
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.
Welcome back to another episode of Equity Mates, a podcast where we explore what's possible in the world of investing. If you've just joined us for the first time, a massive welcome to the community. My name is Bryce, and as always, I'm joined by my equity buddy, Ren. How are you going?
I'm very good, Bryce. Very excited for this episode. Always excited. You know that. People in the YouTube comments know that as they've started commenting that I'm always excited. But how could you not be excited?
No.
We have ticked over into December. We are hurtling towards the end of the year, but particularly for us here at Equity Mates, we are hurtling towards the end of the year because this is our last week of regularly scheduled programming. And then next week, we kick into our summer series where we're interviewing 12 of the best investors and advisors in Australia. Because I'm off to get married.
Yes, you are. This time next week, we will be, about 8 days out from you tying the knot or thereabouts?
Yeah.
Oh, well, about a week.
Yeah, 6 days out.
6 days out. 6 days out. Very excited. Cannot wait. But you're right. Summer series is just around the corner. Traditionally, we have done deep dives on stocks. This year, as you said, we are interviewing 12 experts to get some major lessons from their lifetime in investing and set us up for 2025. It's going to be awesome.
But Bryce, before all of that, we have another jam-packed episode of Equity Mates. We're going to answer a community question from Tom on how we can compare super funds, making sure we're in the right super fund for 2025. That's one thing that we can all do to set ourselves up for success. Adam Dawes is joining us for the final Pimp My Portfolio of 2024. But as always, we're going to start with the news and markets. All right, Bryce. Well, 3 big news stories, a couple in Australia, but we want to start overseas. We want to start with big tech because we did some research this week. We are
always researching.
Always researching. We found some really interesting data on some of the big tech companies that we wanted to unpack because I think it challenges some of the narratives around the big 6 technology companies. So here I'm excluding Tesla from the Magnificent 7.
Okay.
So it starts with the question of the big 6 technology companies, Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, and Nvidia.
Yes.
Looking at their most recent quarterly profit.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Where do you think Apple sits? If you were to rank them by profit, where do you think Apple sits?
Just pure numbers, not margin or anything like that.
Just like raw numbers, like dollars that they earned in profit.
Well, look, I know the answer, but at the time of guessing, I put it as third.
Yeah, you did.
And in my mind, I had them behind Alphabet and Microsoft.
Okay.
So I had those two as top 2. Then I came in at Apple number 3. Then I went Amazon, but I completely forgot about some of the others, to be honest. But that's not where they sit.
Well, you were right about them being behind Alphabet and Microsoft.
Yes.
But Apple is actually the lowest of the 6 now.
It's crazy.
Which challenges some of the notions of where Apple is, given its, up there in terms of largest companies ever. Not quite at the moment, but the really interesting thing is how much it's changed just in the past 2 years. So 2 years ago, Apple was making the most profit. It was the only of the 6 that earned over $20 billion in profit in the quarter. Since that time, all of the other 5 have grown their profits. Nvidia in 2 years has grown their profit over 2,000%. Meta has grown it over 200%. Amazon over 400%. Alphabet almost 90%. And Microsoft almost 40%.
Those numbers are crazy.
I know, crazy.
When you look at Meta in 2 years, Q3 2022, 4.4 billion in profit. Now done just shy of 16 billion in a quarter.
Yeah.
What the hell?
Yeah.
Even Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon's almost doubled their profit in 2 years. Yeah. But Apple down almost 30% from 21 billion to 15 billion in profit. Now, I mean, there's a couple of takeaways from this. The first one is sometimes the best investing opportunities are the most obvious ones. Like, you didn't have to find a small unknown company to make pretty amazing returns. Like Meta was staring us all in the face.
Yep.
But all of these companies have been great. But it is just an interesting one about Apple. So we dug a bit deeper, and you can jump on our Instagram to see all these numbers. We put it up in an Instagram post. But the last 4 quarters for Apple, 34 billion in profit, 24 billion, 21 billion, 15 billion.
iPhone sales?
Yeah, maybe. But
the China story?
Weren't we about to enter an iPhone super cycle because the latest iPhone was the first with Apple Intelligence? Wasn't that the narrative?
No, well...
That was definitely
may have
the
been
narrative.
But I thought that was completely overblown. Like,
maybe they're incurring costs now because the sales of the super cycle and the profit will come later. But it is just an interesting watch. Apple's share price is still up 57% in the past 2 years.
Thing.
But we all know that share price follows earnings.
Yes, yeah.
And if earnings are declining, if this isn't just an anomaly, it's certainly one to watch with Apple.
What we need to be watching more is these other ones. Can they continue this profit growth over the next couple of years? Far out.
Nvidia 2 years ago, Q3 2022,
Not even a billion.
0.7 billion in profit. Last quarter, 19.3 billion.
Goodness, it's phenomenal. Amazon, it's one that I haven't looked at for a while. I've always felt that it's kind of just been hanging on there, but that's some incredible numbers.
Yeah. So 2 years ago, just to close this segment out, 2 years ago, the podium finish was Apple number 1, Microsoft number 2, Alphabet number 3 in terms of profit.
By a huge margin.
Huge margin. Yeah. From Alphabet to Meta at 4.
Yeah.
Now it is Alphabet number 1, Microsoft number 2, and would you believe it, Nvidia number 3.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, let's bring it back home because there's been some developments in Parliament over the last couple of weeks. They're trying to get through somewhat 76 bills or something.
Yeah.
They have a lot of work ahead of them. But one that caught our attention was the Australian Shared Equity Scheme has been passed by government. And this is a scheme that has been designed to... help Australians buy property.
Pump up the Ponzi
scheme.
Pump
up the Ponzi scheme.
So, it's called Help to Buy. That's what you would have seen it called, but it is a shared equity scheme, as you said.
So how it's going to play out, the government will be taking up to a 40% equity stake in the property. Now, I think it's 40% for new homes, 30% for existing homes, obviously to encourage people to build. And essentially it will allow first home buyers to buy with just a 2% deposit. Over the next 4 years, they expect to be able to buy upwards of about 40,000 homes at a cost of $5.5 billion. Now, if you think that it'll apply to everyone, it won't. You have to have a yearly income if you're a single less than $90,000. And if you are buying with someone else, you have to have a combined income of less than $120,000 and also be able to prove that you couldn't buy the home without the help.
Yes.
So,
which feels like it wouldn't be super hard to prove. It's
exactly.
Like, have you seen the price?
Yes.
And look, we talk about how the government has a vested interest in property going up.
Yeah.
The fastest way to lose an election would be to see property prices fall 20%.
Yeah.
And that's why every policy is inflationary in terms of, it pushes prices up.
Yeah.
First home buyers grant, a home guarantee scheme, which now we read somewhere helps over 1/3 of first home buyers, more than 50,000 households a year. The stamp duty concessions, which in the 2010s reportedly cost state governments more than $20 billion. Like these policies cost a lot, but they all are intended to help people spend more on housing or give people more money to buy housing. And that's because the government has an incentive. But now they literally have a direct financial incentive as well, because the premise of a shared equity scheme is when you sell, the government gets their 40%.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so they get their money back. But if you make money on the house, the government will also make money on the house.
Yeah.
So now not only do they have a political incentive, they literally have a financial
they're tied to the
budget incentive.
Exactly. Yeah. It's wild. Yeah. It's wild. Anyway, if you want to know why we referred to the Ponzi scheme, go and listen to our Matt Barry episode. You'll understand why.
Whether you're a housing bull or you're a housing bear, I think we all can agree there's an element of a Ponzi scheme because it requires more people to come in to pay out the people previously in it.
It's not new. The Victorian government has been doing this for a while now, taking up to 25%, but now obviously this is a national
Could you double up? Could you go
I doubt it.
25% Vic, 40% government? Then you're a minority owner in your own house.
They start charging you rent.
Well, I mean, to be fair, we're all minority owners to the banks anyway.
Very true, very true. Now, just to close out the news here in Australia, we had the latest inflation figures come through last week, and depending on which headlines you read, it was either good news or bad news.
Yeah, it's a Rorschach test for how you're feeling about the economy. Whatever you want to see, you can see.
Yeah, so the latest inflation data showed that headline inflation was steady at 2.1%.
Sounds good.
Which is great. That's very close to the it is within the 2 to 3% target band for the RBA.
It's actually on the lower end of the target band.
Yeah.
And so just to emphasize that, it's stayed at 2.1%. That's 2 months in a row.
Yeah. So where are these rate cuts? The bad news is that trimmed mean inflation, which is the RBA's preferred measure, apparently.
No, it is.
Yeah, but I think it historically hasn't been.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I think anyway.
You said that.
I said that. It actually rose from 3.2% in September to 3.5% in October. So not good news on that front. And if that's the number that the RBA is looking at, then that is the way that, that's what we will use to anticipate where interest rates go next.
So late 2023, I made the call, no rate cuts in 2024, which was like wildly out of sync with every major forecaster at the time. Broken clock is right twice a day, and luckily for me, I was right there. I'm not going to say no rate cuts in 2025, but I don't think it would be that bold if we came at the start of 2025 and one of our bold predictions was no rate cuts.
Yeah, I'm not going to do it because I think you're right.
It's just like, I'm not calling it, but like if anyone is basing their personal finances around the expectation of a rate cut, like temper those expectations.
Yeah. It's interesting. We're going through a refinance process at the moment.
Okay. Geez, already?
Well, we got it. We can get a better rate.
Oh.
So, and they're like, lock it in. Why not? And so we're just going to do that because it's going to be better for cash flow.
Did you reach out to your mortgage broker to do that?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I should do that as well, given that we were on exactly the same mortgage.
Yeah. No, I don't think our rates were the same, but it's interesting to see their rhetoric around what's going to happen with rates as well.
They reckon it's going to cut.
Yeah. And so I think you got to take it all with a grain of salt, to your point, like making financial decisions around what's going to happen. It can be quite... You need to be very confident within yourself on what outcome is going to happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy for us to say, don't over leverage yourself.
Absolutely.
Mortgage brokers and banks will give you way more money than you can afford to service.
Absolutely.
That was our biggest learning from our property buying process.
Yeah.
Like the number they give you is stupid.
Yeah. Well, I also have a look at what the expectations were at the start of this year, and I think every month that went by, rate cuts just continue to get pushed further and further down the line. Yeah. So it's just like, come on, guys.
Yeah, and then, trade war, Trump, all that stuff comes in next year.
That's the thing.
What happens to the currency.
Exactly.
That's why I'm saying like...
Yeah, and then the lag effect of that, like it could be 2 years, another 2 or 3 years of inflation that's just annoyingly persistent.
Yeah, and... election coming up, a lot of election spending, more and more of total economic activities being driven by the government. The government's going to have a lot of incentive to put money on the table.
Yeah.
Like there's just a lot of reasons why inflation might be a little more sticky than we all hope.
Yes.
Anyway, let's move on.
Well, this is going to be our last community question for the year. So thank you so much to everyone that has submitted questions throughout the year. We do apologise if we haven't got yours onto the show, but please do keep them coming. We particularly love it when you leave us a voice message, just like Tom has today. Let's take a listen.
Hi guys, wonder if you can provide advice on the new Vanguard superannuation fund and compare that perhaps to Colonial First State and other industry funds in the industry at the moment. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Tom. Love your question. Just one point of clarification. We certainly can provide general advice, but I think how we're going to approach this is start generally about how you can compare super funds, regardless of what super fund you're with and what you're trying to compare, and then we'll apply that to the Vanguard super offering that Tom asked about.
Yeah.
So let's start generally. How can we go about comparing super funds?
You want to look at the historical returns, and you want to be looking at least the last 5 years, because you obviously you want to be in a fund that performs well.
At least 5 years.
At least 5 years, yeah.
The reason for that is you want through the cycle performance.
Yeah.
You don't want a super fund that's done well in like a particular interest rate environment or a particular part of the economic cycle.
Yes.
And so when you're comparing active managers, or in this case, like super funds, that's at least 5.
Yeah. Second thing is you want to then have a look at the investment options to determine whether they're right for you. The classics are just your conservative, balanced, or high growth. But we're now seeing more and more super funds come to market with a variety of different options to suit. And then also have a look at the holdings if available. Some of the super funds do still make it quite difficult to actually look at exactly what you're invested in. But if you can, definitely do that.
Yeah.
The third, and probably one of the most important, is fees. You don't want to be paying high fees, because we know the compound effect of fees over 40 years can be pretty drastic on your overall returns. They have to spell out their fees, and fees can be presented in a number of different ways. So make sure you're looking at the cumulative fees.
Can we just say, like, the one thing that the super industry has that is just, I think is quite bullshit, is the way that they present fees. Like, there's fund managers outside of super have to be pretty, like, they just have to really give you a percentage. But super funds will charge you like dollar amounts and then percentage amounts and different fees.
Yeah.
And so you can never just get a straight percentage out of them. It's always like fees on 50,000 or like fees on 100,000.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely a role for APRA to standardize fee presentation.
Yes, couldn't agree more. The fourth element is insurance. Now, most super funds will provide a base cover of life insurances, not income protection, but some of the other life insurances. You need to determine A, if it's the right type of insurance cover for you, and B, if you need it, because you can switch them on and off, and because they obviously do cost. So have a look at that. And then additional member services, some of them offer things like where we're seeing advice at the moment.
I think that's
specifically
probably the big one.
So those are the 5 key things.
Yeah. So they're the criteria we use. Obviously, you have to like stack rank them yourselves and figure out what's the most important to you and how you would weight them. But then let's actually say how we would do this. So you hear it on every finance podcast and show, and there's a reason for it. Go to the fund's website and read their product disclosure statement. It's boring, it's long, but it does give you all that information that you need to compare. The ATO have a Your Super comparison tool, which is really useful. It does compare fees. It tries to standardize the fees at a $50,000 balance, and it looks at performance as well. Unfortunately, it doesn't include every super fund, and you do have to make sure you're comparing apples to apples. You know, like, are you comparing a high growth fund to a balanced fund? That's not a fair comparison. So you got to make sure you're doing, high growth to high growth in most cases. There are also a number of non-government comparison tools, Morningstar, Super Ratings, Rate City, CanStar. Like, there's a whole bunch out there that you can go. They generally have like a free section and then a paid, more premium comparison tool. So you can look at the free one and see if you like it. But let's actually get practical. So Tom asked about Vanguard Super. So starting on the fund's website.
Yep.
And seeing how Vanguard present themselves.
Yes.
No prizes for guessing how Vanguard sell themselves.
Fees. Yeah.
Lowest fees. That is how they sell themselves. That's how they sell their ETFs. It's pretty on brand for them. They claim that they're the lowest on the market, or one of the lowest on the market. For a balance of $50,000, the Vanguard Lifecycle product, if you're age 47 and under, $280. Compare that to some of the other big ones. Australian Super Balance, $387. Australian Retirement Trust, $517. Host Plus, $625.
Yeah. They also say that the industry average for fees for that $50,000 balance is $481.
Okay,
so a good
nice
starting point.
Yeah. So then they look at performance. And this is where you need to be careful about marketing material, because they only compare 1 year performance. They say 13.2% in FY 2024 versus 11.06% is the industry average. But obviously you don't want to just compare 1 year performance.
Yeah, fair enough, because I think they only have been around for like 15 months or something.
Yeah. But there is a way that you can compare longer term, which is how I'm actually going to conclude this segment.
They're underlying.
Yeah. But then the next step is after their website, we said you can go to Your Super, and then you can compare up to 4 super funds. So Tom asked us to look at Colonial and CBUS, I think.
Yep.
And then I also put Australian Super in there just because it's the biggest.
Yep.
One note, and I reckon CBUS are super sneaky here and maybe something that can be corrected. CBUS, in all their marketing material on their website, I went and checked because I wanted to make sure, present themselves as CBUS. CBUS. That's how you spell it.
Yeah.
If you write CBUS into the ATO's My Super tool, nothing comes up. You have to actually spell out the acronym Construction and Building Union Superannuation Fund. That's the only way you can find them. I reckon they should have to present as a bracket CBUS so it gets picked up in search.
I don't think that's their fault. That's whoever built the Your Comparison tool.
I reckon I am calling bullshit.
No way.
You reckon?
Yeah.
No, but if they...
It'd be some like default... Anyway, it doesn't matter, but
Well,
I don't think that's a problem for CBUS.
On the Your Super comparison tool, they don't want to be compared to Australian Super because they got worse performance and higher fees.
Yeah.
So I reckon they're trying to hide. All right, anyway, that is a separate conversation. We put them in and we can compare them. Unfortunately, the Vanguard Super product isn't assessed. So we can't see its performance, I think partly because it just doesn't have a long enough track record.
Yeah, it's so new.
It does have its fees, so $280 for that $50,000 balance, as we said. That is cheaper than the other ones there. Australian Super was $383, Colonial was $375, and CBUS was $498. And you can sort of see the performance there. Australian Super was the best performing over the past 10 years of those three that we can get the performance, 7.9% compared to 7.3% for Colonial, 7.5% for CBUS. And then, as you said, Vanguard Super only launched in October 2022. It has returned 14% since inception. But if you think about the market since October 2022, that was kind of the low ebb of the inflation and interest rate sell-off, and the market's had a really good run since then.
This is a major problem for me, really, looking at all of these numbers. Past 3-year net returns on all of them, the highest is 6%. Past 5-year net returns, the highest is just shy of 7%. And then 10-year returns, again, just shy of 8%. Like, that's pretty pathetic performance.
Yeah, well... Yes, that is...
I think it's, single diversified, but even your well-diversified VDHG at Vanguard is performing better than that.
Yes.
Which is set up, like you could have that as your super fund.
Well, there's a reason that we both use Superhero, and that's unsponsored, but it's because we want to just try and get as close to 100% growth assets as possible, and we have that control.
Yeah, and I get it. They are, they're probably, these portfolios are built to not lose capital, but the effect of underperforming just the general market by a multitude, like a magnitude of 3 or 4% each year for 40 years is huge.
It's huge. Yeah. Compounding.
It's massive. So
anyway, look, to close out the Vanguard conversation, because we could go down a deep rabbit hole there. The final question is, okay, so there's not a lot of performance data there. How do we actually assess the Vanguard Super Fund?
Yeah.
Well, we can go under the hood and try and understand what it invests in. Now, as you do more research, you read that it has... So it's a life cycle fund. So you don't set your high growth, balanced, conservative. You just say your age, and then it automatically adjusts your asset allocation as you go.
Yes.
But up to the age of 47, it's in its high growth setting, which is 90% growth assets, 10% defensive.
Okay.
Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, it sounds like the VDHG.
It does sound like VDHG. And so then I compared it to VDHG.
Which is the Vanguard Diversified High Growth ETF if you've just joined.
Yes. So Vanguard Super and VDHG both have the same broad asset allocations. Australian shares, 36% of each. International shares unhedged, 26% in Super, 27% in VDHG. International shares hedged, 16% in both. International small caps, 6% in both. Emerging market shares, 5% in both. Australian fixed interest, 3% in both. Global fixed interest hedged, 7% in both. So basically, the Vanguard Super product is VDHG up to the age of 47.
Which for me makes a lot of sense.
Oh, it makes so much sense.
Yeah,
that's not pejorative. That in some ways that's great.
Yeah.
But what it does mean is, okay, Vanguard Super's only been around since 2022, so there's not a lot of performance history, but VDHG is the underlying product. So you can go to the VDHG website and you can get at least 5 years returns. So in the past 5 years, it's returned 9% a year.
There you go. So already at least 2% per year better than the ones that we compared it to, Australian Super, Colonial First State and CBUS.
Yeah. So that's the process that you would go through to really compare whatever super fund you're with to other ones you're thinking about. Obviously, those last few steps you don't need to do if your super fund is listed in your super product with enough performance data that you can just do an apples to apples comparison. So, I mean, look, we're not here to give specific product advice, but I think a general statement would be like the Vanguard super product is a perfectly good super product and it can tick a lot of boxes depending on what your objectives are.
Absolutely. Well, we will leave it there, but thank you so much, Tom, for submitting the question. And as I said, thank you to everyone who has submitted throughout the year. Keep them coming over summer because we'll be back in January ready to answer all the questions that have come through. Head to equitymates.com/contact, or there'll be a link in the show notes where you can leave a voice note. Now, on the other side of the break, we will be joined for our final Pimp My Portfolio with Adam Dawes. And just a reminder that Adam Dawes now offers portfolio health checks. So for $750 plus GST, he will give you a personalized investment portfolio review with his expert guidance that is aligned with your goals and risk profile. It includes a tailored statement of advice and it is exclusive to the Equity Mates community. So $750 plus GST. If you feel like you want some professional support, head to equitymates.com/advice and we'll hook you up with Dawsey. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Equity Mates. It is time for
Pimp My Portfolio. Pimp My Portfolio.
This is a segment where we bring in an expert to review the portfolio of a community member. And today our expert is Adam Dawes. Adam, welcome.
Thank you so much, guys. It's great to be here.
Very excited for this one. Before we crack into it, a reminder that Adam is offering a professional health check on your portfolio for $750. You can go and speak to him and his team and get a limited scope personal advice, statement of advice, I should say, on your portfolio. So head to equitymates.com/advice and we'll hook you up with Adam and the team. But without further ado, we should welcome our community member, Nicole. Welcome to Equity Mates.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Now, plenty in this portfolio. So, Ren, why don't you take us through it?
Yeah, okay. So, Nicole, she has a number of ETFs and then a number of individual stocks. So, starting with the ETFs, the portfolio is anchored by three big geographic ETFs. We've got Vanguard S&P 500, Vanguard All World ex-US, so the complement to that US ETF, and then Vanguard Asia ex-Japan. Together, they make just shy of 60% of the portfolio. Then there's a number of other ETFs. We've got Vanguard Diversified High Growth, a Crane Shares China Internet ETF, BetaShares Global Cybersecurity, BetaShares Global Sustainability, Global X Battery Tech and Lithium, ACDC, and finally BetaShares Cloud Computing. So a number of thematic ETFs there. And then finally, we've got some individual stock holdings, Spotify, Coinbase, Telstra, Woolworths, Endeavour, Stellar Metals, Adore, and Nuhera Limited. A tiny allocation of Bitcoin, and then about 7% of Nicole's portfolio is in an employee share scheme. So,
wow,
a lot there. Hopefully everyone followed along. But Dawsey, we always like to start with a nickname for these portfolios. So what have you got for us today?
Nicole, because you hold Adore Beauty, it is an adorable portfolio.
Wow.
This one is looking really, really good. There's a couple of things that we'll talk about to sort of get it back into shape. But at the moment, it's looking pretty good. But however, your Adore Beauty position probably isn't looking
that was shocking.
that great. So anyway, it is an adorable portfolio.
Was that the type of nickname or feedback that you were expecting, Nicole?
I'll absolutely take that. I'm quite happy with that.
Absolutely.
So, Nicole, before we get into some of Adam's general advice and tips, maybe tell us a little bit about how this portfolio came to be and how you're approaching investing today.
My investing journey started off quite similar to yours, Ren, in that my first stock pick was an absolute shocker.
Nice.
It was New Hera, the last one you mentioned there. I bought it off a stock tip from a friend. I did none of my own research. I put far too much money in and I bought on the way down.
Damn.
So they've recently gone into voluntary administration.
Yep.
So it didn't end well.
Look, we've all been there, Nicole. We've all been there.
But yeah, it put me off for a bit. So I didn't do anything after doing that until I discovered ETFs and started dollar cost averaging into VOO. And I did that as my sole core for a couple of years before I had, I guess, a meaningful amount to invest across multiple things and decided to diversify. And you can sort of see the journey that I've been on in my portfolio. I tried the thematic ETFs, I tried BDHG, both of them I don't think for me long term. And yeah, I've sort of settled on my 3 ETF core. And then obviously, as you mentioned, have that large position in my employer. That I've actually sold down on recently within the last fortnight. So it's not as big as you see there, but it's still probably about 6%.
I was going to say, have you ever sold anything?
No, well, that was my first ever sale.
Nice.
I've got things earmarked to sell, but haven't actually made the jump
Made
yet.
the jump.
Yeah.
Made the jump.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if what you've earmarked and what Dawsey's about to talk about align. So, Dawsey, where do you want to start? What stands out to you here?
Yeah, so I think the core versus satellite kind of approach, which we've all talked about, is the right way to go. So, Nicole, I think you're in the right space as far as getting those vanguards, S&P 500, all world, ex-US, perfect, and then Asia versus ex-Japan. Probably the Asia one or the Japan one's actually started to really move over the last 6 months. So being ex-Japan probably has hurt a little bit, but I still do like that Asia exposure. So I think you definitely need that.
Yeah, well, Japan's covered in VEU too, so I've got a little bit of it.
Okay. All right. So in the oil world. Yeah. Okay. Yep, yeah, absolutely. So then from there, you've got your diversification within your thematic ETFs, which I think are great. We don't want to get caught too much. You got to sort of look, it's okay waiting 2 to 3% in those thematic ETFs. I think that's okay. Each holding, you're not 10%, 15%, so you can have some of those thematics. That K-Web one has been a really great one. I think you'd be doing really well on that Crane Shares one going forward. And certainly like the hack as well, that global cybersecurity. That theme, I think, is just going to continue to keep going, and we're going to need more and more of that. So I like that one as well. The ETHI, the Global Sustainable Leaders, has been a good one also. It's had its couple of bumps up and around, and ethical investing has certainly taken a back seat. I know a lot of younger people still feel it being something that they really should look at, and we should, but it really has taken a back seat at the moment. So it's probably one to keep adding to or looking at as well. So, yeah, I think overall the portfolio looks really good. You've got some international individual stocks, so Spotify, Coinbase Global, you've got some individual ones. Are you buying them just directly via the platform that you're on? Is that how you're getting them?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so that's great. And are you watching those pretty carefully?
I am. I topped up both of them when they had dropped a bit, I think, end of 2022. I don't think I've purchased since.
No.
But I do keep an eye on them.
Spotify is fantastic. That thing is just going to continue to keep going on with, I think they're up to $26 for the family premium now. It's ridiculous, but everybody's paying for it. So yeah, absolutely. So I think, everything's there and it's looking really, really good. You did want to touch on employee incentive schemes. One of the things that when people have worked for a large company, let's say it's BHP, they get access to have the ability to buy shares with some of their wage, and by dollar cost average or putting a couple of $100 aside each month, which you don't miss it, getting into that, and then usually and sometimes the employer actually tops up the amount of shares. So all your staff at Equity Mate should
Once we're listed,
don't worry about that, Dawsey.
So I think you're on the right track with keeping that employee incentive scheme going. When you're inside a company, and there's a lot of people, like I say, BHP, that have a lot of BHP shares, but they go, should I sell some? And well, no, because you're in the company and you're making the company work. You can actually see in inside the company, which a lot of people can't, and you can see the benefits of that. So I think in continuing to do that over time, especially if the price is depressed a little bit, it sort of feels like you're collecting worthless bits of paper at the moment. But what it does and will show is that over time, if you feel the company is still going in the right direction, I think that's something that we should definitely look for, and keeping up that employee incentive scheme.
Now, Dawesy, there is a bit of an assumption there, because you've said that you're inside and you can see that the company's going in the right direction.
Yeah.
But I think there's people on employee share schemes that might be doing it because their employer might be topping it up, or do they get to use you before tax income to buy it? Yeah, so there might be other benefits, but they might not feel like their company is flying.
Yes.
How would you, and Nicole, we have no idea like what you think about your company, we haven't asked you, so but in that situation, how would you approach an employee share scheme?
I think it's worthwhile just putting money away, having most of your audience now is worked out that dollar cost averaging is the right way to invest, and it absolutely is, and it should be within employee incentive scheme as well. I think you just continuing to put it away, a couple $100 a month, whatever it is, you don't really realise it, and you're getting the benefits of building part of the portfolio. Now, if it gets to 50% of your portfolio, potentially then you might want to sort of pull it back a bit. But, with a sort of 7 or a 5% weighting, I think you're okay. And if you've got the view that this company is going somewhere, because you wouldn't be there if it wasn't going somewhere, I think you want to bet that it is going to do well, and then that will pay off in huge dividends further on down the line.
How do you think about that, Nicole? Does that help you think through it?
It does. I think there are a wide range of outcomes for the company that I work for, so that doesn't really help. But most of the balance is gifted, so I'm not paying and having it matched. That is part of it, but they stopped that program, and it's just part of my REM. So assuming I meet the vesting conditions, I just get a parcel of shares every financial year. So I'm not putting my own money into it, which is great.
That's pretty nice.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, then personally for me, Dawesy, it would come down to whether or not you think there's a better investment opportunity. Because if you're not putting money into it, you're getting gifted stock that vests. It's like, I could sell that and invest it into something that I think is better than the company that I'm currently working in.
Yeah.
That's...
you're right. I mean, it's certainly that you want to be putting money into where things are growing in the right direction versus stagnating or going backwards. So, yes. However, it didn't cost you anything. So there's a big tax issue for people with employee incentive schemes. And it's another way that the company can handcuff you to keep in there, because the shares don't get vested for 6 months, even to 12 months, even 2 years sometimes. So even if you leave the company, then half of those shares disappear, right? So you got to look at it. There's a classic example where resource brokers, when the market's down and all they're doing is they're collecting worthless bits of paper, but they know that pieces of paper, which is share certificates, it's going a little bit old school here, but share certificates, that's going to turn around one day. It is going to do well. It's just, so how you look at it, but keeping that incentive scheme moving forward, I think is the right way to do. And it's certainly part of your REM, then I wouldn't say no to it. I would continue to hold it.
Okay, great.
Just if we turn to the individual stocks. So on one hand, you've got these sort of high-flying tech companies over in the US, and you bought them at the right time, and I'm sure you've done very well on them if you bought late 2022, and I'm talking about like Spotify and Coinbase here. And then on the other hand, you have perhaps some of the most boring and slow-growing Aussie companies in Telstra and Woolworths. And I don't mean that as a criticism of you. I do maybe mean that as a criticism of Telstra and Woolies. But how do you think about approaching individual stocks and that side of your investment?
Yeah, so I think that attitude has changed over time. Telstra was one of the first, and that was just like a recommended by the parents, good stock, safe stock, whatever, get the dividends and then go from there. Woolworths was an Endeavour play, so that was not long before the demerger, and I probably should have sold soon after in hindsight, but that's fine. I think my attitude sort of shifted to become more of a sort of, or to focus on more of the growth stocks, given that I am, in my 20s still, have enough to invest in things that are a little bit more risky that could return a little bit more So that's where I'm sort of focused at the moment.
Does it? And then I'd love to get your view on that. But like particularly in the context of this portfolio where there is such a strong weighting to like an ETF core already.
Yeah.
So how do you think about like those blue chip, the Telstras and the Woolworths alongside like a big core weighting?
Absolutely. I think you're in the right area. It's core versus satellite. So yeah, absolutely. Keep going with the blue chips as, they're good quality businesses. There's not too much overlap because you don't really have an Australian ETF or an index ETF.
Yeah.
So potentially
that was deliberate because I was investing in Australian stocks. I figured I'd be overweight Australia, and so I didn't want to be overweight Australia in ETFs as well.
Yeah, you wouldn't be overweight with the shares that you've got. Remember something like an A200 or a VAS, you like Vanguard, so I'm saying the VAS, which is the top 300 stocks, and the A200 is the top 200 stocks. You wouldn't be overweight in the Australian market by having that diversification. So potentially looking at getting an Aussie index, because the way you've sort of positioned the Telstras, the Woolies, look, they're good businesses. I know one of you used to work for...
I was at Woolies.
Right, there we go.
Actually, and Bryce used to work for Telstra as well.
Yeah,
so this is the Bryce Lesky portfolio.
And I've done a stint through Endeavour, so...
we should have nicknamed that differently. Anyway, I think getting those, but then you've got Stella, Adora, and Nuheara, so that sort of feels like you're just throwing a dart at a dartboard and sort of having a bit of a guess there. So I'd look at an A200 or a VAS, a Vanguard 300, and then potentially looking to bring out the individual holdings. Remember, you potentially want 30% of your portfolio in Australian equities. Okay. You could actually build that side of things. And then I'd look for good quality blue chips that have got a good growth profile. BHP is a great one, but then also some of the banks. There's plenty of other stories in there, and some of the tech stuff in there. You've got the cloud, you've got cybersecurity, those kinds of things. They're more international. We've got some really good tech businesses here in Australia that look really good as well. So building that out a little bit, I think, is something that would definitely help the portfolio moving forward.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Nicole. Plenty to think about there from Adam. But I think overall, look, the core of your portfolio is certainly set up for the long term, and looks like you're doing pretty well on the individual stocks as well. So thank you so much for submitting to Pimp My Portfolio and taking the time with us today. We do really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to know I'm roughly on the right track.
That's it.
Well done, Nicole. Keep going, and thanks for braving the segment and sharing your portfolio with us today.
Thanks, guys.
If you would like to submit to Pimp My Portfolio, head to equitymates.com/contact. And if you would like a professional portfolio health check with Adam Dawes and his team, you can head to equitymates.com/advice, and you'll find all the information there, and we'll be able to connect you with the team. But Adam, as always, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Ren, we'll pick it up next week.
Sounds good.
You have been listening to an Equity Mates Media production. In the spirit of reconciliation, Equity Mates Media acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. This podcast is intended for education and entertainment purposes. Any advice is general advice only and has not taken into account your personal financial circumstances, needs, or objectives. Before acting on general advice, you should consider if it is relevant to your needs and read the relevant product disclosure statement. And if you're unsure, please speak to a financial professional. The hosts of this podcast and their guests may have positions in the companies mentioned. Equity Mates Media operates under an Australian Financial Services Licence 540697.